it turns out that a lot of the mechanisms that prevent senescence, our cells from ceasing to function, are affected by physical activity. There are many, many different mechanisms, and the list is too long to get into right now. But for example, physical activity helps repair DNA that gets damaged as we age. So physical activity activates enzymes that are involved in DNA repair.
Hello, welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Statt, the director of Cambridge Forum, and today we're delighted to be having an upbeat conversation with an evolutionary biologist who is not only an expert in the history of running, but apparently a person who inspired the barefoot running movement. I'm speaking, of course, of Harvard professor Dan Lieberman, whose latest book is Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. Well, Mark Twain apparently quipped that he got all the exercise he needed from attending funerals of his friends who did exercise. So we all know that's a bit of a stretch, because people like Professor Lieberman have been looking at this topic for decades, and they've learned a thing or two along the way. For one thing, love it or hate it, we all have to confront the prospect that we have to do things more physically in order to stay healthy. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
You say that the notion of exercise is modern, weird, and unpleasant, and I think a lot of people would agree with you, but we have to do it, so we might as well learn to like it. So can you tell us a bit about your love-hate affair with sport and exercise yourself, and how you came to write the book?
Thank you for inviting me to this forum, and I want to talk a little bit about my book, Exercise: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. And I'll try to answer your question in the first part of this talk. And I just want to preface my remarks by saying that I realize that a lot of people are probably, approach a lecture like this with some trepidation, because we're sort of sick of being lectured about, quick and easy fixes on how to get old, never get old, or get super strong, or run a marathon without ever trying. And that's not what I'm going to do in this talk at all. Instead, what I'd like to do is sort of to give two parts in this talk. The first part is I'll talk a little bit about why I wrote the book and why you might want to read it and what it's about, and then we'll pause. And then in the second part, each chapter of the book deals with a different myth of exercise, and I'll run through them super fast, rather than, I won't go into any detail, but super fast. So, sometimes books have a kind of an origin, and this one really did have a kind of a discrete origin. And it began in 2012. So I was just finishing up a previous book called The Story of the Human Body, and I was invited to go to the Ironman World Championship Triathlon in Kona, which is an amazing event. I wasn't racing it. I was at the medical conference, and I got to kind of be in the middle of it in the medical tent, and watch all these amazing athletes. And it's, if you don't know about this event, it's just extraordinary, right? So it begins with a 2.4-mile open water swim, which gives me palpitations just to think about, because I hate swimming. Then there's a 112-mile cycle race across the desert. And then, just to kind of make things a little bit interesting, then there's a full marathon, and it's like 90 degrees Fahrenheit at that point. So it's just kind of remarkable. And there's like, no way I'm going to do that. But the motto of Ironman is that anything is possible. So here's the guy who won it the year that I was there. His name is Pete Jacobs. I mean, he's like basically an automaton, not a human being. It's astonishing that he could do all that in just a little bit over 8 hours. And just so you know, that people have 17 hours to finish, so they have to finish by midnight. And this is the last person to finish, Harriet Anderson over here, and she's being greeted by one of the women's winner. And she finished just under the mark. She finished 41 seconds, before the clock went.
Wow.
So it's kind of remarkable. And she's 77. But it really is true that anything is possible. But like, there's no way I would do that. I mean, that's just not for me, right? And so anyway, I was kind of filled with kind of wonder at what I had just seen. And then a few weeks later, I was in Highland, Mexico. This is the Sierra Tarahumara, where I was studying the biomechanics of a Native American group called the Tarahumara. They call themselves Raramuri, and they're very famous for their running. And it's a beautiful place, very remote. I was sort of traveling around, sleeping on floors of pueblos, and I was very lucky to be able to watch some of their traditional races. This is the men's race. It's called a Rara Hippari, where they kick a ball and then chase it and kick it, chase it. And there are two teams, and sometimes the races can go on for 30, 40, 50, 60 miles. And there's also a women's race called an arouette, which is usually about a marathon length. And instead of a ball, they have a hoop, and then they flick it with these sticks. It's beautiful and amazing events to watch. And so, I got a chance to watch this race, and actually I got to see this guy in action. And he's a 70-something-year-old Tarahumara gentleman. And when I was measuring him, he was telling me about all his running, and just a lovely, delightful person. And he had lots of great stories to tell. And I was asking him how he trained. How do you get ready to run these like 60-mile races in your 70s? And it turns out there's no word for training in their language. And so the interpreter I was working with was struggling to try to explain my question. And so, I explain how I get up in the morning and I run 5 miles and, on various mornings, et cetera, to kind of get myself ready. And he looked at me and he said, why would anybody run if they didn't have to? And I remember laughing and kind of embarrassment. And then realized, he was right. Until recently, nobody did this kind of thing. Although he's an amazing runner. His training is his life. All the work he does in fields and the carrying and the walking and whatever. But he doesn't train the way a lot of people say in the United States do. And it made me realize that, even though I kind of sort of knew it, I never really thought about it, that exercise is a weird modern Western phenomenon. So everybody does physical activity. That's bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that produce energy. But exercise is something new, right? It's voluntary, discretional physical activity to sustain or improve health and fitness. And the way we do it in our world, here in Cambridge, Massachusetts and elsewhere is we medicalize it, we commercialize it, we industrialize it, we commodify it. But it's really it's about as normal as going to the dentist or flossing your teeth or paying taxes. It's a modern thing, right? And to me, the apotheosis of exercise is the treadmill. I mean, just think about it. It's a noisy, expensive machine that you spend money to use or buy, and you work really hard and you get nowhere, right? It's like trying to explain that to our ancestors, right? And so the other place where I do research is in Western Kenya. I've been working in this community for the last more than 12 years now. And in this community, there's almost no roads. A lot of people are barefoot. There's no running water. There's not much electricity. And we've, among the various experiments we did, women carry enormous loads of water and firewood. And so we did an experiment a few years ago where we brought women from the community to the closest place where we could plug a treadmill in, which is about a several-hour drive with a Jeep. And it was interesting. Here's a woman on the treadmill. There's no pictures of her running on the treadmill or walking on the treadmill because they found the treadmill just really unpleasant. Like we could never get people there to walk normally on a treadmill because, after all, it's not a very normal thing, right? It takes practice to get used to walking on a treadmill. And if you haven't been doing it before, especially if you if a researcher makes you wear a portable oxygen measuring device as this woman is wearing, it's really very difficult to do. And so that's why the kind of the joke cover for the book is this pictograph of sort of like ancient rock art of a hunter-gatherer on a treadmill, because I think it's kind of an interesting, preposterous idea. And just so you know, the modern treadmill was actually invented in the English prison system. It was actually a way to prevent prisoners from relaxing and having too enjoyable a time in prison. So people like Oscar Wilde, for example, were made to trudge for 6 hours a day on treadmills as a way of punishing them. So if you think a treadmill is a kind of punishment, yeah, you're in good company. So how did I end up sort of studying this sort of thing, right? Studying and writing and thinking about the evolution of human physical activity. As I said, I do field work in different parts of the world. We do lots of biomechanics in my lab. How did that happen? So I thought before I get into the myths of exercise, I thought I'd sort of tell my story. So this is me in I think 6th or 7th grade, and I was kind of a nerdy kid. Grew up in New England, and I really was picked last for pretty much always. I was not a great athlete. I was not on any teams. I never thought of myself as being physically very adept at anything. I was very insecure about my talents, my physical abilities, but I did have a kind of a wonderful family. My mother in particular is a kind of a hero. She she was a professor at the University of Connecticut, and she started jogging when she was in her 30s because the University of Connecticut at the time built a fancy new gym, and they didn't let women use the gym, even though it was built with federal funds. So it was actually an early Title IX case. And so to liberate the gym, she started running. And at first she could barely run a quarter of a mile. And eventually she got up to longer distances, and she became an addicted runner and ended up running 5 miles a day for at least 50 years. And she's still extremely physically active. And so I kind of got to think that it was just normal for your parents to exercise, to run. And on holidays, my parents also used to take us hiking. My parents love hiking, and so we used to go to various parts of the world and go hiking, and we did skiing in the winter and all that. So I grew up being physically active. It just wasn't the kind of sort of sports kind of physical activity. I wasn't really on any teams. I didn't race. I didn't do anything like that. Then I grew up and became a professor, and for the first part of my career, I worked really on heads. I was a skull guy, and I was interested in how and why the human head is the way it is, and how our skulls grew. And I started getting interested in the problem of how we stabilize our heads when we run, because it turns out that when animals run, most animals when they run, they stabilize their head by flexing and extending their necks. But humans can't do what quadrupeds can do. And it turns out that we have this interesting anatomy we started studying called the nuchal ligament, which helps stabilize our heads when we're running. Here's a headless runner, by the way, from my lab. And it turns out that we could see when that anatomy evolved in the human lineage, and what an important role it played in the evolution of running. And that it made the argument that humans evolved to run in order to around 2 million years ago in order to scavenge and hunt. And my colleague Dennis Bramble and I published this paper in Nature entitled Born to Run. Well, that's how Nature advertised it. The real title of the paper was something more sort of academic. And then from that, I started getting interested in other aspects of running, and quickly started studying barefoot running, because of course, if humans evolved to run, for the first few million years, we evolved to run barefoot, and realized that there was so much interest in the evolution of running and in injury and barefoot running, and then I ended up writing my first popular book called The Story of the Human Body, which is an attempt to sort of think about how evolution is relevant to human health. And studying running in many ways fostered my own interest in running. So as I said before, I grew up thinking it was normal to run, but I probably never ran more than 5 miles in my life until I was in my 30s or 40s. But because I wrote that paper and started getting invited to give talks, I decided I'd try a marathon, and I loved it. And then I started doing barefoot running, and I've tried all kinds of other crazy things, including a few years ago, I ran this marathon against horses in Arizona. It's called Man Against Horse, and I described that in the book. And it's been a wonderful part of my life, but I've also come to realize just how emotionally charged some of these topics can be. And the controversy I ended up getting involved with was the barefoot running debate, which is a perfect example of how terribly we think about physical activity and exercise and health. So instead of, the way I was thinking about it was that, well, humans evolved to run, and we evolved to run barefoot. So what can we learn about running by studying barefoot running? But the way it was popularized in the press was that it's either an either-or thing, right? Either barefoot running is better, and there's a whole bunch of people who were arguing that if you wear shoes, you're basically a capitalist tool, and there's something wrong with you, and their shoes are like coffins for your feet, and that if you are barefoot runner, you'll never get injuries, and your teeth will be whiter, and people will like you more. And then there was a reaction against it by people who are arguing that barefoot running is bad and evil, and you're probably a polygamist or a communist or something. I don't know what they were arguing, that you need shoes with support and cushioning, etc. And I'm like, what's going on? I mean, this is crazy. This is like a totally polarized view in which each side is arguing the extreme against the other side. And I became to really sort of evident to me that we're really exercised about exercise, right? So the word exercise is to be vexed, to be worried, to be anxious, to be harassed. And there's so many topics about exercise. Is barefoot better, or should I wear shoes, and will running ruin my knees, and how much should I exercise, and should I do weights, cardio, how much should I sleep, how much should is sitting the new smoking? I mean, there's so many attitudes out there, and if you read the Times or the paper, etc., you kind of get this sort of sense of whiplash. And of course, the biggest problem is that most of us aren't exercising enough. According to the CDC, less than 20% of Americans get what the US Surgeon General recommends as the minimum dose of exercise that a normal healthy human should get, which is 150 minutes a week. So that's 21 minutes a day, right? So, and about a quarter of Americans don't even exercise in their leisure time. So why is it that we're so exercised about exercise? And I think there's several answers. And one of them is that, if you pick up the newspaper or get up, click on the web or whatever, it's really easy to come across just totally contradictory information, right? So you'll read, articles about how wonderful running is for you, and then another article about how runners are, running themselves into an early grave, and you can read articles about how, aerobic exercise is exactly what you should be doing, do cardio, and then another day you'll read about strength training, and it's no wonder that people are really confused. I think another problem is that so much of the literature, so much of what you read about exercise is focused on weight loss, as if that's the only reason that people should be physically active. And so that lens sort of permeates and distorts, I think, a lot of the information that we get. And then finally, and maybe the worst issue, is that so much of what we read is about elite athletes. It's about the world's fastest people, the strongest people, these people who can do amazing things, and it kind of perverts and sort of a normal sense of what people, what normal, average, everyday people can and should do. I mean, we didn't evolve to run marathons, and it might not even be good for you. So why is it that we read so constantly about these elite athletes? And then finally, we have a very Western post-industrial bias. I mean, about more than 80% of the data that we have about physical activity, about exercise, just about everything else we study, comes from people from Western educated, industrialized, rich countries like the United States and United Kingdom and Sweden and Australia. And that's like, 10% of the world. But the rest of the world, and of course, all our ancestors, have a very different relationship to their bodies in terms of physical activity. And if we want to study physical activity, we can't just look at people in our own backyard. We have to look at the whole of humanity. And so for that reason, I decided to write a natural history, which is really what this book is, right? It's, and as a natural history, I thought I'd divide up into 4 topics. So first is if physical activity is important, then inactivity is also important. So the book begins with an understanding of physical inactivity. And then I think about I write about topics related to speed and strength and power, and fighting and sprinting and things like that, and strength. And the next part of the book is about endurance, so walking and running, and as well as dancing and other endurance activities. And then the final part of the book applies all those topics to human health. And throughout the book, I sort of take 2 approaches. The first is that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Our bodies weren't designed, they weren't engineered, they evolved. And so if you want to understand how our bodies work, you have to understand that evolutionary history. And that humans are complex creatures with culture. And so if you want to understand what humans do, you need to take an anthropological perspective. And so the book takes this integrates an evolutionary biological perspective with an anthropological perspective. And I tried to put a lot of my own experiences in it. I've traveled around the world. I'm very interested in participant observation. So I've raised horses. I've traveled to visit hunter-gatherers and worked with subsistence farmers and gone hunting with Inuit. And, I try to try everything that I study and integrate it with what we know about human biology and health science. So with that, why don't I pause for a little bit in case you want to ask some questions, and then I'll resume to talk about the myths of exercise that I try to tackle in the book.
Well, it's fascinating. I like the way you fused your own experience with all this stuff you've picked up from going around the world and studying different people doing different things in different cultures. So you made me laugh when you talked to that gentleman that just runs. One day he does the 60 or 70 miles and doesn't train. Because my father, who was raised on a farm, used to always make great fun, take issue with my 2 brothers who are marathon runners. And we lived in London. And he'd say, oh, nothing beats physical hard labor. You don't need to be running. And I wondered if you thought that this was a pretty unnatural life that we were living, the modern life. And when did we get kind of taken with this idea. You say that as far back as Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, he valued exercise. How did he know that exercise was important?
Well, I think, first of all, those are translates. Everybody has always known that exercise is healthy. I mean, I don't think Hippocrates came up with that idea any more than Confucius did or other sort of ancients from the ancient world. But remember that in who was Aristotle and who were they talking to? They were talking to the elites, right? The very, very, very top, right? Because the vast majority of Athenians or people in every country in the world until recently had to work every day. They were laborers, and so it was only until recently the very, very, very elites of various cultures could live a life without constant, regular, daily physical activity, through labor. And what really shifted, so it's long been known that if you were super wealthy, future king of England, or Italian prince, or future Maharaja, or whatever part of the world you're from, that if you're not going to be out there in the fields or carrying things and working, you better do something else. So this is not a novel insight. It's only that recently that this has become a worldwide problem with the Industrial Revolution, as we've invented machines that obviate the need for labor for the vast majority of us, that it's suddenly become a big, large, a problem that affects a large swath of people in developed countries. And as industrialization spreads around the world, this is becoming even more serious. So for example, the fastest growing disease in the world is diabetes. And one of the major ways to help prevent diabetes is being physically active. So your father was right. Back in the old days, people didn't need to exercise because they were busy. But now, if you live in central London or Boston or Cambridge or Mumbai, you're probably not exercising. You're not being physically active anymore, and you have to now replace it with this very strange, modern, and intrinsically kind of, instinctively difficult behavior, which is to force yourself to be physically active when you don't want to be.
So you bring up all sorts of interesting findings in the book, things I had no knowledge of, such as chimpanzees, they rarely live past the age of 50, because that's when females go into menopause and the males are no longer siring offspring. So somehow we humans have found a way to get around this kind of sexual redundancy to live longer by being kind of hunter-gatherers of a sort, or being grandparents. And you say many of the mechanisms that slow aging and extend our lives are turned on by physical activity. So can you tell us a little bit about how we're the kind of aberration in that, how we've got this extra leap?
Sure. Well, I think this is a really important part of the book, which is that, all animals, with the possible exception of killer whales, die pretty much when they rarely live beyond their reproductive period. I mean, occasionally, in captivity, for example, but chimpanzees rarely live actually beyond the age of 35 or 40. It's very rarely do they even get to 50. And the reason for that is that from all other species, once you're no longer reproducing, you enter what's called the selective shadow. Right? Natural selection doesn't care about us anymore, right? Because we're no longer improving our reproductive success. That's all that natural selection cares about. But humans are different. Humans evolve. So humans who survive childhood in hunter-gatherer populations typically live about two decades beyond their reproductive period. And that's because we figured out a new way to help improve our reproductive success, and that's by provisioning our children and our grandchildren. So grandparents, grandmothers, grandfathers are out there. Even though they're no longer having kids anymore, they're digging up foods, they're hunting, they're collecting foods, they're getting a surplus, and they're feeding that surplus to their children and their grandchildren. And then they're actually improving their reproductive success. But at the same time, that physical activity, because it's stressful, turns on repair and maintenance mechanisms that keep our bodies healthy, right? So if you go for a run, you stress your body, but your body then responds to those stresses by producing antioxidants, by fighting the inflammation, by down regulating the sympathetic nervous system, the flight and flight response. There's a whole series of responses. Almost every system of the body, good things are turned on by the stress of exercise, and often those repair and maintenance mechanisms actually yield a net benefit. It's like cleaning up a floor after you spilled something, and the floor is now cleaner than it was before. And so so our long lives are both a consequence, but also a cause of physical activity. Physical activity is a cause and as well as a consequence of our long lives. That's what I should have said. So they're not interrelated. They're actually, we evolve to be physically active as we age, and that physical activity actually is crucial to helping us age. And so today in the modern world, we can live without exercising after we stop reproducing, but we need a lot of medical help to do it, right? We need drugs to lower our cholesterol levels and deal with our heart, our hypertension and our aching knees and this, that, and the other. But of course, that's all recent. And those chronic diseases are really very recent.
You're not an advocate of the no pain, no gain field, that you have to be dragging yourself on your knees from the gym for it to have done anything good. No?
Well, that's one of the myths of exercise, this idea that, it turns out that use it or lose it is true, right? So for at least for muscle. So, you don't want to have extra muscle. So we lose non-useful muscle because it's expensive. But it turns out that this idea that you have to kind of get yourself in pain and, if you don't go home from the gym and you're not in serious pain, you haven't done any good. That's just not true. If you want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, yes. But if you just want to simply stay healthy and avoid muscle wasting, what's technically called sarcopenia, just regular amounts of strength training without anything extreme that causes pain is all that's necessary. And the good news is also, whether you're 50, 60, 70, or 80, a little bit of strength training has enormous benefits to keep you strong.
Okay, you also say middle-aged and elderly Stone Agers never had the option to go to Florida and kick up their heels. So we evolved in order to be useful and helpful as grandparents. You said we're digging, walking, etc. Did our ancestors ever get things like osteoarthritis? And what sort of things did kill them off? I know they didn't eat terribly well, so they probably had rickets and all sorts of other things, but
well, it's a long and complicated story, and you have to go on a sort of disease by disease basis. So arthritis is old. People did get it, but the rates of arthritis doubled after World War II, after you correct for age and body weight. So arthritis has gone up. Heart disease used to be vanishingly rare to the point of non-existent. Hypertension, if you look in the populations that are sort of hunter-gatherer population, subsistence farmers, they don't get hypertension as they get older. And arguably that's the biggest cause of morbidity of disease in the world. So heart disease is cancers appear to be much less common. Metabolic syndrome, diabetes, almost non-existent to the point of non-existent in many populations. So we are subject to a wide range of chronic ailments that occur sort of after we hit our 50s or 60s, after we stop reproducing, that used to be close to non-existent because of a combination of diet and exercise. Also stress is another. There are multiple sources, but there's not like one thing, but physical activity is certainly an extremely important component of all of that. We call these mismatched diseases. That's what my last book, The Story of the Human Body, is about.
It's interesting you zoned in on arthritis shooting up after the Second World War. What would that be attributable to?
Well, we don't know. Actually, we're doing a lot of research in my lab on that. Obesity, of course, is a major contributor to arthritis. But even after you correct for obesity, rates are much higher. And we think, so we're doing some experiments in the lab right now to try to study that. We think maybe shoes are a factor. Certainly physical activity might actually be a major issue, because we think physical activity is actually much more protective against arthritis than we previously thought. This is a topic that is, I don't know the answer to this, but it's something we're very interested in studying.
In the book, you talk about the Hadza in Tasmania, a group that you've spent time with. And you say there the grandmothers forage and dig 5 to 6 hours a day, and they walked twice as fast as you, so you didn't have to have a Fitbit on if you were there. Is it because their lives depend upon this and there aren't any rest homes that you either stay active or you're left behind? Is it that kind of thing or not?
Yeah, these are hunter-gatherers. They still, every day they go out to get the food that they're going to eat. They don't grow food. And this is until 600 generations ago, all humans were like that. So you can't retire if you're a hunter-gatherer, and for that matter, subsistence farmers don't get to retire either. It's the concept of retirement and no longer being physically active as you get older is an extremely recent idea that only is possible in places like America and Sweden and France and whatever. But it wasn't true for anybody until recently.
So basically, you have to move to eat, is what you're saying, in those places. If you don't move, you don't forage.
I mean, until the invention of, look, just think about like this morning when I took a shower, right? I just turned a faucet and out came hot water. Until recently, even in the early Industrial Revolution, if I wanted a shower, I'd have to go and fetch it from the neighborhood pump. And then if I wanted to heat it up, I'd have to get firewood and heat it up. We just take all of these incredible comforts for granted, but until recently, even the simplest thing like washing took a lot of energy and effort. Just when I want to have a cup of tea, I just press a button. The foods are available to me in the supermarket. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to carry them because there's a cart in the supermarket. I don't have to carry anything. We lived lives where we have removed the necessity of doing physical activity for almost everything. I could even brush my teeth without even having to go with an electric toothbrush. The list goes on.
Yeah, we've made a lot of things obsolete, haven't we? You talk about this thing called cellular senescence, which is when you deteriorate, the function deteriorates in the cell, and how this can be offset or slowed. And there's some promising research. I think corals and lobsters don't actually exhibit this, which is kind of amazing. So what can we learn from this, if anything?
Well, it turns out that a lot of the mechanisms that prevent senescence, our cells from ceasing to function, are affected by physical activity. There are many, many different mechanisms, and the list is too long to get into right now. But for example, physical activity helps repair DNA that gets damaged as we age. So physical activity activates enzymes that are involved in DNA repair, which is one of the reasons why physical activity may be important in helping prevent cancer. Our cells proteins get glycated, so they get heated up and kind of
brown.
Sugars attached to them. Proteins denature. There's a long list of very boring and kind of complex processes. And these happen as we age. But the thing is that we don't normally do much about them unless our bodies are stimulated to repair. And it looks like physical activity is an important stimulus that turns on a lot of those repair and maintenance mechanisms, which is why it's the stress that actually activates the repair and mechanism response. And since we never evolved not to engage in these kinds of stresses, we never evolved to turn them on in the absence of physical activity.
Oh, right. It's rather strange, though, that if you think of the most inert things or the least active, lobsters and coral have got to be up there, right?
Right, but we're so millions of years removed from a lobster or a coral. It's not really all that useful. And remember, they're living in very low energy environments. They're not warm-blooded creatures. They're in a very cool environment. What keeps a lobster alive for a long time is not what keeps a human alive for a long time.
What a shame. Thought there might be a quick fix there with the lobster.
There are no quick fixes. Anybody who promises you a quick fix is a quack.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one quick question on the quick fix. So is it a bad idea to get our supplements from bottles instead of from exercise? What's wrong with the old antioxidants and all those good things there?
Well, I think everybody knows the answer. Everybody knows the answer to that, which is they don't work. If they did, we'd know that, right? So, Linus Pauling and Evers, if it's going on and on and on, people are always looking for a quick fix. And you know what? Quick fixes sound great. We desperately want them because we all want something that works easily, that we just pay a little bit, comes in a bottle, you just ingest it. And if you can find me a quick fix that has worked, I'll be impressed. The closest thing we found so far is intermittent fasting, which is not a quick
right,
fix, by the way.
Yes.
But other than that, there's no substitute. And the reason is that it's evolutionary history, and exercise turns on hundreds of mechanisms that are good for our body, but a pill maybe turns on one. And biological things aren't just like, a machine where you fix one thing and it's fixed, right? We're complex organisms with lots of interactions. And that's why a sort of systemic approach to our bodies is the only solution. We keep, if you, it's a way to make a lot of money, to argue that this pill will do a lot, but and of course all pills have side effects, and do harm as well as good. But exercise is superior to all of them.
No substitute.
There is
have
no
to throw out
substitute.
all the expensive fish oils and everything else. Well, along with that, perhaps this is a good segue, Daniel, into the next section of your talk, which is the other myths about exercise. You say there's about 12 of them.
Sure. Okay. Let me. I'll try to do this quickly because I don't want to take up people's time too much. So, as I said before, the book is a natural history of exercise, and so I tried to think of. Each chapter I tried to kind of orient around a myth. So the first part of the book is about inactivity, because inactivity is as important as activity, and you can't exercise all day long. So we need to understand inactivity. And really the first myth, the most important myth of the book, is really the key one, which we've talked about already, which is that we evolved to exercise. And there's this idea out there, which I call the myth of the athletic savage, that our ancestors used to be incredible athletes, and they would get out of bed and just like run an ultra marathon just for the heck of it. But it turns out that if we look at what hunter-gatherers really do, they're kind of moderately active, but not crazy. So the average hunter-gatherer in Africa, for example, is doing moderate to vigorous activity only 2.25 hours a day. They actually sit about 9 to 10 hours a day, as much as most Westerners. And they don't do exercise. They're only physically active when it's necessary or fun. So they'll be active when they're hunting or when they're digging up food. They'll be active when they're dancing or playing. But otherwise, they sit around just like we do. The second myth, which is related to that first myth, is that it's unnatural to be lazy. People who don't exercise, we call them lazy. But actually, from an evolutionary perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because the basic equation of life is energy in and babies out, right? That's basically what we're here for, as far as natural selection is concerned about. And you can only spend energy on 5 things. You can spend it on growing your body, maintaining it. You can spend it on storing fat, which of course you can use back for other purposes. Spend it on reproduction, or moving around, being physically active. And ultimately, all that natural selection cares about is reproduction. So if you spend less energy on physical activity, it means you can spend more energy on all these other functions, especially reproduction. And so that's why all animals, humans are no exception, have deep and basic instincts not to waste energy when it isn't beneficial, because they'll be selected against. Another myth is that somehow those of us who sit much of the day are somehow intrinsically abnormal, and that sitting is the new smoking, and that we should stop sitting, and chairs are out to kill us and all that sort of stuff. But if you actually go, as I do, and visit people in different parts of the world, you'll find that they sit just as much as us. So the Hadza in Tanzania, for example, that hunter-gatherer group that's been studied enormously, when you walk into camp, this is what you see. Everybody's sitting, right? Turn out they sit 9 to 10 hours a day, and Americans sit between about 9 and 12 hours a day. Of course, it varies on your age and sex and whether you're president of the United States or whatever. But we sit a lot, right? And it turns out that it's not so much how much you sit, it's really how you sit. So there are more and better ways of sitting, and also really it's also what you're doing when you're not at work, right? So it's leisure time physical activity, that physical inactivity or sitting, that's most correlated with bad health outcomes. In other words, if you sit all day at work and then you go home and sit at night and in the morning and etc. when you're not at work, then you're in trouble, because then you're not exercising. Another myth is that we need 8 hours of sleep, and it turns out that that's just not true. The idea that electricity and clocks and iPhones and television have all ruined our sleep is just another myth. It turns out that if you go to populations where there's no electricity whatsoever, and there's no internet, there's no cell phones, and there's no nothing that's electric, it turns out they sleep between 5.7 and 7.1 hours a night. And in fact, if you look within the United States and other populations like that, you look at the ratio of heart disease or other illnesses relative to how much sleep you get, turns out that 7 hours turns out to be better for most people than 8 hours. Of course, there's a variation around that mean. So this idea of 8 hours is just completely made up. And yet we stress people out because we tell them, if you don't get 8 hours, you're not getting enough sleep. And so then people get stressed about it. And of course, what does stress do? It prevents you from sleeping in the first place, because cortisol, which is elevated by stress, is the enemy of sleep. So part 2 of the book is about speed and strength. And again, there's tons of myths, and I just picked a few. So one of them is that normal humans trade off speed for endurance. So, and this is, I guess, a perfect example of how if we focus too much on elite athletes, we end up getting a very warped view. So it's true, if you look at the world's fastest marathoner, this is Eliud Kipchoge. He's run, he actually ran a sub 2-hour marathon, but kind of was cheating because he had, was running behind a car, etc. But here's his fastest actual world record time. And he's running 5.9 meters a second. So he's running 440 miles, basically, for 26 miles. He's way slower than Usain Bolt, who's the world's fastest sprinter still. He's running 10.4 meters a second. So he can run 10 meters. But if you had Bolt run a marathon at that speed and Kipchoge run 100 meters, Kipchoge would have a pathetic 16:57 meter dash, and Bolt would be able to run a marathon in a little bit over an hour, right? But it turns out that those guys aren't really very useful for the rest of us, right? How many people do you know who can run a 4-minute mile or 4.5-minute mile? It's, let alone do it for 26 miles, right? And it turns out that for the rest of us, if you actually do some speed occasionally, it also builds up your endurance. And that's why high intensity interval training, which is what you occasionally kind of do bursts of really high intensity, actually are good both not only for your speed, but also for your endurance. Another myth is that we evolved to be super strong. So we have this idea, some of it comes from CrossFit and who knows where else, that our ancestors were like, jacked up like Arnold, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's not true at all. They were endurance athletes, and in fact, muscles are really expensive tissue. And so it turns out if you actually look at hunter-gatherers here in red compared to, this is people in the UK, hunter-gatherers are, they're about the 75th percentile of people in England. So they're strong-ish, but they're not super strong. But the important thing is that whereas strength really declines rapidly in the UK and other Western countries, it declines at a much slower rate among hunter-gatherers, and that's because people continue to use their bodies as they get older, so they don't get muscle wasting as much as Americans do. Another myth is that sports are exercise. That can sometimes be the case, but if you think about the sports that we value the most, like the ones in the Olympic motto, faster, higher, stronger, those tend to be activities that are more important for combat, right? A lot of the sports, a lot of things that we do in sports are, sprinting and fighting and throwing and kicking and punching, right? And we love these sports, but the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of American kids who play sports actually spend most of the time on the bench. Certainly was my experience when I was a kid. And I think that we evolved sports for other reasons. It teaches skills, it does teach some physical capacities, but it's also important for all kinds of social reasons. And then the book goes into that in great detail, and I won't tell you, but it has to do with reactive versus proactive aggression. Part 3 of the book, I talk about endurance, and the most basic fundamental physical activity that humans do is walking. It's what we evolved to do. And the typical hunter-gatherers walk 6 miles a day. If they're men walk about 9 miles a day. And often they're carrying things when they're walking, and yet we've kind of, because we think about exercise always with this view of weight, we often kind of denigrate the relevance of just basic physical activity because it's not very useful for weight loss. And so for example, keep reading these days about how that exercise is useless for losing weight, and that's actually also not true. So it's true that if you want to lose weight rapidly, dieting is the best thing. If you walk a mile, you'll burn about 50 calories, whereas if you have a Gatorade or a Lucozade or some French fries, you'll get about 365 calories. So you're much better off not eating the fries or not drinking the Gatorade than walking a mile. But the thing is that we're often using very, very limited goalposts to evaluate walking, right? So the standard recommendation for physical activity is 150 minutes a week, which is 21 minutes a day, and which is really not very much, right? So if you do that for a month, which is how long many experiments last, you might lose like half a pound. And if you do it for a year, you might lose 6 pounds, right? So that's not a lot. And if you're trying to lose 50 pounds, which is what your average American is trying to lose, that's not all that effective way to lose weight. But if you do just double that to 300 minutes a week, so that's 40 minutes a day, you can actually lose 12 pounds a year. And there's plenty of experiments which show that. And that's actually, so if you do it for a few years, you actually very slowly, gradually, in a very healthy way, lose a fair amount of weight. The other thing is that we also forget that the big issue with weight is not so much losing it, it's also is not gaining it, right? It's preventing weight gain in the first place, or just as importantly, a lot of diets fail because people lose the weight and then they regain the weight. Like 90% of diets, people go through these yo-yo diets. And many studies have shown that people who diet and exercise, as opposed to just diet, don't lose that much weight. But once they finish the diet, those who continue to exercise keep the weight off. This is a study, by the way, on Boston policemen, versus those who don't exercise gain the weight back. And so it shows that really what matters the most about exercise is not so much weight loss, though it helps with a little bit of extra weight loss. It's preventing the weight gain or weight regain. So if walking is the basic fundamental form of sort of moderate physical activity, running is the basic form of vigorous activity that we evolved to do. We've been doing it for millions of years. And people are also very exercised, or they're scared about running. And the most common phrase you hear is that running is bad for your knees. And it's true that knees are the most common site of injury, but I think that's partly because a lot of people don't know how to run properly, and that there's good ways to run and bad ways to run. And I think if we teach people how to run properly, they can avoid some of the knee injuries, but also the idea that it causes arthritis, which is because a lot of knee injuries you can recover from, arthritis you can't recover from. But it turns out that there's no evidence. In fact, there's actually counterfactual evidence about running causing arthritis. Like the evidence is that running actually is good for your knees and actually helps you prevent arthritis. But that's just a myth that's just out there over and over again, said over and over again. And yet there are randomized controlled experiments, longitudinal experiments, gold standard experiments, which show that that's not the case. We've already talked about this, but the idea that it's normal to be less active as we age is just not true. Today people retire, but in the past, retirement wasn't an option. And in fact, here's a graph of women who are hunter-gatherers, and you can see that the grandmothers who are post-reproductive are actually working as hard, if not harder, than the mothers, right? And that, of course, that physical activity helps keeps them young. And so the final section of the book is about how you apply all this to health. And again, there are plenty of myths. And one of the myths, I think maybe a very important myth, is that just telling people to exercise, or shaming them, or blaming them, or medicalizing or commercializing it works. And the answer is that's just not true, right? We know that the proof is in the pudding that only about 20% of Americans actually get enough physical activity, and most Americans don't even exercise at all. And I argue that we should take an evolutionary anthropological approach and remember that really we evolved to be physically active for two reasons, and two reasons only: when it was necessary and when it was fun and social. So if that little voice in your head tells you don't want to go for a run in the morning or go to the gym or whatever, there's nothing wrong with you. That voice is normal. Everybody faces that little voice. It's just that you need to find a way. We need to find in this modern world a way to overcome that. And I think the way to do that is to treat education, exercise much the way we treat education, which is also a modern thing, right? Let's make it fun, make it necessary, make it social. And I have ideas in the book about how to do that. Another myth is that there's an optimal dose and optimal types. People always want to know, like, how much should I do? Tell me what should I do? What kind of exercise should I do? And the answer is there is no one dose. It depends on who you are. It depends on whether you're male or female or old or young, and you live in a city or you live in the country. And if you're worried about Alzheimer's, or if you're worried about heart disease, or if you're worried about osteoporosis or whatever, there's no one dose, and there never can be. What we do know is that if you just look at a very general outcome, which is, for example, your relative risk of dying in a given year, if you exercise, just 60 minutes a week, you can reduce that risk by about 30 to 40%. If you exercise 150 minutes a week, so that's 21 minutes a day, you reduce that risk by about 50%. And as you do more, you actually continue to decrease that risk quite considerably, and it eventually tails out, right? So, there's a certain point, there's no benefit to doing more exercise, right? So that gave us this sort of general recommendation that of 150 minutes a week, but that's just an arbitrary point on a graph, right? And it's not going to be the same for you as it's going to be for me, as it's going to be for some friend or some relative or some whatever. It's different for everybody. And then finally, I think we often mischaracterize exercise as a magic bullet, right? That it's going to solve all your problems. And I think we're overselling exercise. It is true that exercise has a lot of benefits, but it's not going to prevent you from dying. We all have to die. And it's not going to prevent you from dying from all kinds of diseases. However, That said, if you look at the data and you look at the mechanisms, it really is true that exercise lowers the risk of many common diseases. It lowers the risk of obesity, heart disease, respiratory tract infections, including COVID, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, arthritis, osteoporosis, depression, anxiety. The list is very, very long. And the important point is that we didn't evolve to exercise to reduce these diseases. It's rather the absence of regular physical activity that increases our vulnerability to these diseases. And that may seem like a trivial distinction, but actually it's a very important distinction. So in the final analysis, I hope that, because I'm very aware of the fact that exercise is not a pleasant topic for a lot of folks. And writing a book about exercise is a bit of a challenge. And I hope that the way I've written this book and all the stories and etc. is both enlightening and entertaining, but really more deeply, I want to change the way people think about exercise, in particular in the science of health in general. I think we oversimplify. I think we have a very biased attitude. I think it's over commercialized and over medicalized. I think we're very judgmental and not compassionate. And finally, I hope the book is useful in that although I don't make any prescriptions, I hope that it gives some ideas about how to make it fun, how to make it necessary, and how and why it can be healthy and rewarding. And in the final analysis, I really hope that I help people enjoy being active without making them exercised about it.
Wow, that was a great fast track through everything there.
Thank you.
I'm sure not everybody agrees with everything you said. I'm one of those foolish people that takes glucosamine, for example, because I just think it's helping me and my joints. And I would love to run barefoot, but I wouldn't dream of it.
Well, I'm not saying that everybody should run barefoot.
No,
I don't believe that at all. And that's part of the problem with that. We make everything extreme, right? If you want to run barefoot, go ahead.
Yeah.
Out in the snow today, there's no way I would run barefoot here in the weather.
All right, we've got an interesting question here from somebody. Have you addressed the disparity between Americans and other nations with regard to philosophies of exercise in your research? Having helped to run an expat group for mothers of preschoolers when living in Europe, I remember being astonished that exercise was viewed as a self-care luxury by Americans, but as a requirement akin to water and food by Europeans.
Well, I mean, I think it's true that the cultural variation in terms of attitudes about exercise are extraordinary. And in the United States, we have a very sort of libertarian approach. One of the sections in the book I actually describe, I went to the Bjorn Borg company in Sweden, where that's the only company I know in the world that actually requires all its employees to exercise. If you don't exercise, you get fired. And so I actually went to their weekly exercise regime. Now, we think that's outrageous, right? Imagine your boss requiring you to exercise. But in Sweden, which is of course a different culture, I mean, it's still a little extreme in Sweden, but it's much less so extreme in Sweden. But that's still a Western country, right? But you go to, rural Tanzania or parts of, other parts of the world where people aren't living lives with machines and running water and electricity. It's not even a question. I mean, nobody has the option not to be physically active. People aren't exercising, they're working every day. And that's really what we evolved to do, is to be very physically active throughout our life, lifelong physical activity in order to survive. And so really exercise is you can think of it as a modern necessity, or you can think of it as a modern luxury. But either way, we didn't evolve bodies that thrive, that do as well in the absence of some kind of physical activity. And in the absence of having to do it, we have to choose to do it. And that's really what exercise is. It's choosing to do physical activity for the sake of health and fitness. And so, yes, I think we need to do much more to, for example, require kids to exercise in school. I mean, they're paying a huge price for not getting enough physical activity when they're young.
I think that's very interesting that Shannon Keith raised this question, because I remember when I visited Iceland that I got invited to go to the swimming pool as a social event. Everybody goes at least once or twice a week with all their friends. Yeah. So you chat, you sit, you swim. It was, I mean, I've never heard anyone invite somebody as a social event to go to the swimming pool here. I'm not talking about summertime, I'm talking about in the cold.
Well, there are. I mean, I know there's a group here at Harvard of senior swimmers, and they meet several mornings a week, and they swim together. So
keen. This is much less. This was much less earnest.
Sure,
it was
but we can and should do more of that. I mean, like we have running groups or walking groups or whatever. I mean, those kinds of social environments make it so much more. I mean, first of all, they obligate you to go, right? So if your friends are expecting you, you really kind of need to show up. And then secondly, you get support for doing what you're doing, right? You get feedback, you get some positive reinforcement because frankly, you could also sit on your couch and watch television or read a book and maybe enjoy yourself as much, but you might not get that positive feedback. Let's see. I'm getting two different sets of chats here. So one is, what if MBTA buses stopped every 3 blocks instead of every block? Would the forced exercise be a good public health measure? Well, I mean, it might be. Of course, there are some people who are disabled, and it would not be tough. It would be tough on them. I think we need to be compassionate about people who have disabilities. I think that I'm not a fan of forcing people to do stuff, but if we can help people, they give them incentives to get off the bus a little bit early and to walk a little bit farther, that would be good. Maybe remind people, say, hey, if you have some extra time, why don't you get off a stop early? That might be another way of accomplishing
that. Maybe you can go to the next question, because I've lost I can't see anybody right now. I've lost my Zoom connection. This is the second time this has happened.
So there's a question: how should a society promote health and fitness to overcome widespread obesity and activity? During this pandemic, are children losing out on organized physical education and sports? Can we recover from the setback? Great question. So I've been actually involved in a worldwide study where we're trying to figure out just how much the lockdown has affected physical activity levels. And the answer seems to be that, of course, it's different from country to country, but on the whole, there's been a decrease in physical activity overall. And as you might expect, that's been very much patterned based on social inequality. So people who are wealthy and have gyms in their basements or access to resources are getting more physical activity. People who are already more physically active have been actually getting plenty of physical activity, but people who are disinclined towards physical activity or don't have access to resources are getting a lot less. And yes, that's going to have a long-term effect. It's going to take us years to see what its effects are. And I think there needs to be much more public messaging and much more effort on the part of organizations from every level, from universities and schools to other sort of government organizations, et cetera, to try to help people be physically active when we're also being so isolated and can't do all the things that we normally do, because most physical activity people get is not exercise. It's like walking to work or climbing this. I mean, my iPhone, right? I have my iPhone keeps track of my steps, and my daily step count has decreased by about 50% since the pandemic. I'm still going out and running, but all the non-running, I'm getting a lot less exercise because I can't go anywhere, and this is a big issue. And I think we were so worried about the immediate infectious disease issue, right? There's no attention being paid, or at least very little attention being paid to all the other effects, including the mental health effects as well.
Yeah, who would ever have anticipated the massive upswing in Peloton sales? I mean, stationary bicycles were very uncool 12 months ago.
But Pelotons are expensive, right? I mean, most people can't afford a Peloton.
Waitlist for that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's I mean, this pandemic, this epidemic has really dialed up the inequalities that we've all been aware of, but it's just and physical activity is just one of them.
That's true. Did you get to that last question there, Daniel? Since I've now got my
let's see.
How should a society promote health?
Yes, that's the one I just.
So I think we've got them. I think we've got them all.
There's a question. I keep reading not just recommendations, but studies that claim that their results show that 8 to 9 hours of sleep are correlated with better health outcomes. Are these all wrong? And the answer is I believe so. I mean, you can, in the book I cite quite a few studies. The most famous one is by a guy named Kripke, Krikpe, PKE. But these are based on hundreds of thousands of individuals. Yeah, find me the studies that show that 8 hours is correlated with better outcomes. I'd be curious, but looking at the literature, most of the studies I've seen, there's a U-shaped curve, and the bottom of the U-shaped curve is around 7. So we're often told that 8 hours is better, but I don't see a lot of evidence to support that. And I sent this chapter. I'm not a sleep expert, but I sent it to several sleep experts, and they said I was on target. They did not disagree with my reading of the literature.
So I hate to tell you, but the clock has gone round a full hour. Hard to believe, because this was such a riveting and fun program. So Daniel, thank you so much. I'd like to thank everyone out there for listening to today's Cambridge Forum with Professor Dan Lieberman, Harvard evolutionary biologist, author of Exercised, Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. And Cambridge Forum is made possible by the generosity of Herbert and Dorothy Vetter, the Lowell Institute, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and you. So please don't forget to donate. You can go to the website, www.cambridgeforum.org, where you can find a podcast of this and all the other forums we've made this year and before, as well as details of future programs. So let me thank you, Dan, thank all the listeners and the viewers, and wish everyone a very happy, healthy new year.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.